Okay, I think we can begin now. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this IvyWise live seminar. My name is Felix, and I'm the regional representative in Hong Kong and China for IvyWise. So I've been living in China for about 11 years. I'm a fluent Mandarin speaker, and I would be the main point of contact for any clients in the region. So the response to COVID-19 has hit college-bound students especially hard, with school closures, testing changes, and more. So we are here to give you a few updates on what's going on, how it's going to affect your college preparation and admissions processes this fall. We will also be answering some of your questions at the end of this presentation in a live brief Q&A. So people have a lot of questions about what this all means for the college admissions process this coming fall. So the rubric. As a quick background about the general admissions process, all colleges evaluate applicants based on a set of rubrics, which includes a mix of hard and soft factors, as you can see on the screen now. So while schools won't likely change their rubrics dramatically this fall because of this pandemic, we do expect them to make some changes within the rubric to accommodate this unusual time. So we're going to cover those aspects of the rubric that we've been getting the most questions about in order to better inform families on how the admissions process will happen this fall. I also want to take a minute to say that we're keeping up to date with all the latest developments. So like us on Facebook and be sure to bookmark our blog at blog.ivywise.com for the latest info. We also have a free resource on our website for students applying this fall. So we will share the link in our comments. Okay, let's get right into it. Firstly, I would like to introduce IvyWise counselor, Christine, who's going to cover the most important factors that colleges consider, of course, which is grades. Okay, over to you, Christine.
Great. Thank you so much, Felix, for that introduction and getting us started. And I'm very happy to be here with all of you guys virtually. My name again is Christine. I am one of the IvyWise college admissions counselors. I was a former assistant director of admissions at Yale University and Georgetown before I started working with IvyWise and with students and families more directly on the admissions process. The first thing I want to kind of talk about is the first factor really is the most important one. That's the student's transcript grades. Of course, during this very difficult time, schools are closed worldwide. Temporarily, we hope. We want students to be back in their classrooms as soon as possible. But there are some immediate impact, especially with the grading system. As we speak to students across the US and across the globe, we are learning and we're hearing that schools are reacting and responding in different ways. Sometimes some schools will be grading as usual, and they'll give a kind of a whether it is a percentage grade or a letter grade, they'll continue to do so. Others will place more of an emphasis on the first half of the semester as students, were still in school in January and February, perhaps even through parts of March. So that may be impacted differently, and they'll do some kind of weighting or averaging system. And of course, some schools, as all of you may have learned or heard, are just going for a pass and fail system. So whatever system your school happens to decide on, I think really the important thing to understand is, one, everyone is impacted, and college admissions officer will have a great understanding of that. And this is not just for current rising 11th graders who are about to dive into the process for admissions, but this is also for younger students, 9th graders, 8th graders, as well as seniors or 12th graders in high school, and even college students. So I think this is a universal, a global impact that will be part of this fall's admissions process, and in the incoming years as well for younger students who are impacted. Admissions committees and admissions directors always read students contextually. So this year, more than ever, that context will be important in looking at students' grades. So they may look more closely at fall grades, what students were doing and how well they were doing, as well as the overall trajectory of the students' overall high school, secondary school experience from early on in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. And to really put this semester in context, they made sort of say, the student has been doing well, and we believe that student would have done well if school was normal fall, this spring semester. They may also look into this coming fall semester grade as well, to get a sense of where the student may be. Again, fall may be impacted, so we don't know. But do understand, I think that really the takeaway message is that grades will be contextualized. It always, the transcript has always been a contextualized document, and ever more so, I think, this coming admissions season. The other part, the other hard factor, so grades, transcript, that would be one. The other hard factor, what we consider hard factor, will be test scores. And that's, as all of you know, will be an important part of the process. And in this regard, more than in any other regard, has been heavily impacted, as all of you have heard, from the College Board to the ACT organization to the IB to the A-levels and across the world. Testing dates, TOEFL dates have been impacted and canceled. And so we are monitoring that very closely to see the development. And for right now, and sometimes the College Board and the ACT organization will continue to offer their June exams, and upcoming when there are considering various options to add additional test dates, testing site. Of course, we don't know the specifics. We don't know anything for sure until the College Board with ACT organization and other organizations make announcements. But that's all the more reason to really just follow our blog, as we're trying to keep up with all these updates are coming literally every day, it seems like. One important change, I think, that will be impacting students, 11th graders applying this fall. A number of U.S. universities are what we call going test optional for this coming admission cycle, and perhaps in the next year or two as well. And it depends on the university. Again, we have a blog that keeps count of all the schools that have currently announced they're test optional. So not all universities or colleges in the U.S., but some, and it's coming out over, kind of on almost a daily basis. So that will be important part of the process. The other things that to keep in mind for U.S. testing, U.S. admission, it will be that the AP exams are impacted this year for those who are on an AP curriculum. They're shorter, 45 minutes. It'll be taken at home. As far as we've heard from the College Board, from the president, the CEO of the College Board, that the grading curve will not be any different from any other year. So our understanding is that admissions officers, again, will read in context of these test scores, and universities will continue to make decisions about whether or not they will actually accept this year's scores, whether for credit when students matriculate. And as far as we've heard from some universities, like the University of California system, Berkeley, UCLA, they will continue to accept credits per usual from this year's test score. So there are a lot of changes, and we do want you to stay updated. So again, our blog is a great place to go for those up-to-date information as we learn from the various organizations. I do want to also kind of emphasize too that test optional could mean different things for different places. And so at this point, I want to turn over to my colleague, Scott, to talk more about what does test optional mean, and some other consideration that would be helpful for students going into the process this fall.
Hi, everybody. My name is Scott. I'm also a counselor at IvyWise. I've been counseling with IvyWise since 2009. And prior to that, I was an assistant director of admissions at Yale University. So as Christine has been saying, context is really everything. Universities are going to be really trying to understand what type of a student you've been all along, as well as, how this virus, this pandemic, has had an impact on your schooling and on your test scores. So in terms of test optional admissions, in direct response to all of these cancellations of test dates, a lot of universities have said, we're going to be as flexible as we can. And we anticipate that quite a few more will continue to do so, but not every single university is going to. And so this means a couple of things, practically speaking, for you as a student. First of all, it means you still want to write your exams if at all possible. Because right now, I'm imagining that many of you who are juniors don't really know exactly where you're planning to apply. And so since this is a very flexible situation, very dynamic, and things are continually changing, you have to consider that you may end up wanting to apply to a school that continues to require testing. Universities like Yale, for example, are still actually saying that they expect students applying this fall to actually have written the SAT. What this also means for you when you think about this is that universities are often test optional right now, but not test blind. Something that factors into their overall rankings is their average in test scores, and they're still going to have to report these. Also, consider that a lot of students are kind of hoping, that this flexibility might give them an in some place where they ordinarily perhaps wouldn't have had the testing to do well. So these universities are going to get more applications than what they usually get, and they're going to be looking for higher scores to keep their averages up. So if you're a student who tests well and who has the opportunity to write these exams, we highly recommend that you go ahead and do so, because a high score can actually help you out a lot more, perhaps even than usual. So just again, don't worry if you're in a situation where you're unable to write the exams, because many universities are being flexible. But if you can do so, you have the time to study and do well, we highly recommend that you do it. IvyWise as a company has great tutors that can tutor all over the world via Skype and other socially distant, physically distant media. And so, if you're in a place where testing dates are offered, do it. You can keep up with that on our blog, on the College Board website. As the situation changes, we're doing our best to keep you updated. So I'll pass it back to Felix now to continue the conversation.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Thanks, Christine. So, these hard factors are really important in the admissions process, but admissions is holistic, meaning that soft factors are also important and might even be more so this coming fall. Things like recommendations letters might be relied upon more heavily for context in applications. Demonstrated interest will likely involve more of the essay informed interest and application strategy. Applying early decision or early action has a big effect on demonstrated interest. So schools have pushed back these deadlines before for extraordinary circumstances like these. So we won't be surprised if they do make early decision, early action decisions later to accommodate the lack of testing and to allow students more time to prepare. So don't forget, we have a new resource on the website and the addresses and all of these topics in depth that we have shared the link in the comments. So be sure to check those out. And next, Christine, do you want to talk a little bit about essays?
Great. I would be happy to talk about essay, the components. So kind of shifting into more the soft factor aspect of the admissions process. A lot of students talk about essays and how important they are. And while we can't go into depth today about how essays are how written, but I will say that essays will continue to play an important part, perhaps a little bit more so because everything is a little bit more contextualized. Students will have different stories to share. Students may not be submitting test scores. So definitely this will continue to be an important part of the student. And it's an opportunity for them to demonstrate, to share a side of themselves that you couldn't really learn from other aspects of the application, not the transcript, not the test scores, not even activities. So I do encourage students to take time to kind of consider what would be a good topic, what would be something that's unique about them. One thing that has come up in some of the conversations I've been part of with counselors and admissions officers is that will COVID-19 be a big topic potentially? Because I think we're all globally impacted. But at the same time, if everyone is writing about it, that may not be the best topic. So I do encourage students to think beyond the pandemic, even though it is as impactful as it is for all of us, to really consider unique aspects of who they are and the story, the personal stories that they want to share. And I'm sure every student will find that unique story. Just be reflective and take time this summer to really think about what would you like to share with your admissions readers. I will turn over now to Scott to share a little bit more about extracurricular activities and how those play into the process.
Yeah. So, the year is grinding to a halt for people across the globe, right? Depending on where you are, you might be, encouraged to stay at home, or you might actually be on, some sort of a lockdown where you don't actually really have the option to continue your activities as normal. Colleges understand this, right? I mean, this is global. This is everywhere. So you don't need to think to yourself, oh my gosh, how am I going to explain this big interruption in my activities? Because it's you and literally the entire world. So again, take the stress off, let there be some peace of mind in that. But what we also want you to think about is the fact that colleges want to see go-getters, right? They want to see people who make the most out of what's available to them and are still looking at the world with a certain mindset. By that, I mean, there are lots of people that are in great need right now. We haven't even seen the full extent to which this pandemic is going to affect the global south, developing countries. So what can you do to help, right? That's a mindset that universities are looking for. So even if your formal community service activity is on hold, that doesn't mean that it's time to just stop serving or to stop looking around you and seeing who needs help and how you can help. So the type of person they're looking for is the type of person who doesn't say, "Whew, I don't have to put that on my resume. Let me just, occupy myself with video games for the next 3 months." Can you give yourself, to a nonprofit or to some large organization that's providing relief? Can you get your friends together to give? Can you raise awareness of a space that actually needs help? Can you do that in your own community if perhaps you're actually allowed to go outside where you live? That's the mindset that they're looking for. Another example might be you had an internship that is no longer going to be possible because you can't actually go physically to the office. Can you reach out to the company and ask them, maybe, can I do this internship virtually? Because when you consider how much of the work probably would have taken place online anyway, you can sit in on the Zoom calls, and be part of staff meetings. You can go over work via email with the team that's probably doing it, online anyway. So this is you learning to be flexible. This is you being creative. You can, if you were tutoring in your high school, surely, you might still be able to do that virtually if you're, living in a place where most people have access to the internet. You can provide resources to a community that maybe doesn't have access to the internet and needs that for their students to carry on learning. So the lesson here essentially is A, colleges understand what's going on. And so an interruption to your activities is not going to be held against you. But B, be a creative person who looks around themselves and says, what can I do? What can I do to make people's lives better? What can I do as a plan B? That's just a great life skill for you and for your career, and certainly something, that will be applicable and helpful to you at this particular time. So think about the activities you're doing and how you might alter them to make them work in this time of physical distancing and this time of, people being online. And then think about how you can help in a space, either where you live or where you don't live. That's just the kind of person that universities are looking for anyway. And so if you have that mindset, we would hope that you would put it into play. So let me pass this on also to Christine, because this same type of thinking applies not just to your ongoing extracurriculars, but also to your summer activities. So she'll talk a little bit more about that.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott, for that really helpful kind of contextualization of extracurricular activities during this time when we're all at home, socially distanced from one another. As many students who are thinking about their summer plans, and you perhaps have already secured a spot at a summer program, may be getting notices now that some are going online, some are being canceled. And so we are learning, I think, some of the earlier summer programs are making decisions and letting students know. While the ones that are coming up later, late July, August, perhaps they haven't fully decided. Our sense is that some of the programs that may be perhaps contributing to the revenue stream of their universities may still go on one form or another virtually, perhaps at a discounted rate. So even if a program is completely canceled, or that some are going online, some are being canceled. And so we are learning, I think, some of the earlier summer programs are making decisions and letting students. Sorry, that was kind of a feedback and playback. But just to continue that thought, that even if a program is going online or it's canceled, I think there are a lot of opportunity for students to really consider this summer a productive time. For some students, it will be focusing on preparing for standardized tests because the spring dates were impacted and canceled, so they need to spend time doing that. Others, I think, will find a great way to be productive, as Scott mentioned, that if you were planning on doing an internship or volunteering at somewhere and work with an organization, that a lot of the work can continue to be done virtually, joining meetings. I've encouraged students to keep doing what they love, to do a lot of planning if they have initiatives at school. If they are leader at some of the school clubs, that they could still continue to meet with their members. They could still continue to plan develop content if they are teaching a class. This is also a great time to deep dive into a particular academic expertise that you're interested in. I've had students who are interested in learning more computer programming languages, and so this is a great time. A lot of these courses have been online or continue to be online, so that's a great time for students just to study and to really go deeply. Again, local contexts and local situations are great. Scott's already mentioned just kind of really going to your community and understand the needs as much as you can. I've seen students even now responding by making the do-it-yourself mask at home, or they are supporting other students in the area by virtually tutoring. All these activities can continue well into the summer. You can fundraise for a particular cause locally. I've seen very creatively students do musical performances, putting together musicals and other concerts virtually with many, many screens on your devices. So continue to do all of these things as a way to deepen your interest, to explore your interest, to show colleges that despite what's going around all of us, that you are continuing, you are exploring, you are pursuing your intellectual passions, and trying to make a difference in your community. Those are all good things, and we encourage students to continue to do that. We do understand that students are in specific situations, in specific places. And so we are working with them individually to plan out more personalized summer plans. And if you happen to be interested in that, we are offering programs to do that. And so be sure to stay to the end of our program and contact Felix, and he will be able to assist you in connecting with one of our IvyWise counselors to discuss a more personalized summer plan that you can put into place if the COVID-19 situation continues to impact us, which it likely will into the summer as well. Of course, other things are impacted that we've been talking. Summer visits, summer college campus visits have been impacted, or spring ones, and the summer ones will be impacted as well. So I'll turn over to Scott now, again, to talk more about campus visits, college research, and how can we conduct that productively and efficiently during this pandemic situation.
Yeah, so I think, or at least I'm hoping that the theme is coming across here overall, that there's a lot that you can do, but there's a lot that you should not be worried about. So one of the things that I know that I think about with the students I work with, and I know that admissions offices are thinking about as well, because we're all just human beings here, all in a very difficult situation, is please be sure that you're taking care of yourself. So some of the things that we're talking about in terms of continuing to be productive, a lot of that is just good for you mentally and for your emotional health during what really is a very difficult time. Cabin fever is real. Being stuck in a house with people who are making it difficult for you to work and concentrate, that's real. Admissions officers understand that. But there's an extent to which, continuing to be productive, continuing to focus on your goals is also just going to be really good for your mental health, right? So in terms of looking forward, to your university application process and to the visits that perhaps you can no longer have, how do you get creative about that? You can do a lot online. Although it would be lovely to be able to visit every single campus that you're interested in, right now travel just isn't really feasible. Most university campuses aren't open, but you can definitely take advantage of what universities are offering, and then in terms of focusing your research. So in general, something that we really, really advise students a lot about is researching. When you're applying to a university and you're telling them, I'm certain this is the place I want to be, you're an excellent fit for me and all my future goals, you have to back that up by demonstrating that interest, by demonstrating that you've done your research and you can actually point to reasons why this is the university for you. I think a lot of students have often seen a visit as a shortcut to that. Hey, I visited. That tells you that I'm so into you, right? No, you also have to do that research to figure out why this place is such a great place for you. And that's why a lot of students really struggle with the essays explaining that to colleges. Even though the personal essay is your much longer, much more in-depth essay, I've found over the years that the short 100, 200 word essay explaining why I want to go to your university actually often challenges students more because they recognize the name, they have a great gut feeling about it, but they haven't done their in-depth research. So maybe, just maybe, this is our opportunity to kind of take a step back, and because we can't do those visits, actually now spend the time doing our research online. Looking into the academics of the university. To look at a school and say, well, I want to study economics and you've got the #1 ranked econ program, therefore it's right for me. But is it really? In your career going forward, are you more focused on economic theory? Are you focused on economic modeling? Are you focused on practical applications in particular business fields? And what do they have at that university that's going to help you get there? If you're focused on the practical modeling, are you going to work with professors who even deal with that? Are there opportunities to do research with professors if you're more focused on the theory? That's the depth of research that you've always needed to get to demonstrate to the university that you're really interested. Now is your opportunity to spend all that time that you were focused on the visit on focusing on doing that research. So we highly recommend that you spend your time with that, be organized about it, take good notes, so that when the time comes to actually write your essays for the university, you're able to explain this confidently and really understand yourself what the best place for you is going to be, where you're going to thrive. New opportunities now include things like virtual tours, virtual information sessions universities are hosting. We recommend that you register for those if that's possible. So a lot of universities track what they call demonstrated interest. That means that, before all this, a visit to campus would have been part of demonstrated interest, perhaps visiting with a professor. Now that's a little bit less possible, but doing a virtual info session, following their social media, those types of things still may count in your favor. So especially if you're really interested in a university that tracks what they call demonstrated interest, take advantage of these opportunities. Just because you can't physically visit the college does not mean that learning about it has stopped. And so all of this research is just going to enhance your experience if and when you are able to go visit, perhaps coming up in the fall, because hopefully all of this will be over by then. So all of this is just having a major impact on students around the globe. And US admissions are already competitive, for a lot of students from other countries. And some of this might make it more competitive and a little bit more challenging. But it's always been a way for you to stand out that you truly understand what the university offers. And now is a golden opportunity for you to really dig into that. As international students, just to kind of broaden the discussion a little bit just from your university visits, we know that this is affecting, your testing dates. In many countries, you had fewer dates to begin with for, exams like the SAT, the ACT, the TOEFL, and now there are even fewer. Visa delays might become an issue, going forward, travel restrictions, that sort of thing. Again, these are all things that universities are going to be aware of and be willing to work with you on. So you don't want to just sort of blanket say, oh my gosh, there are all these travel restrictions. I can't apply to US universities because I won't get let in when the time comes. Because hopefully a year and a half from now, this will just be, something in the rearview mirror. And by then you will have been admitted and you're able to go where you need to go. However, I think that, diversifying your risk essentially is something that you want to think about. I mean, for one, universities want international students, right? They rely on those revenues. They want the diversity on their campuses. And so they will be willing to work with you. So you don't want to just give up before the whole process is started. But, consider maybe applying to schools in more than one country, because this pandemic over time is going to have a different effect in different places. We can see right now already the US has become, the hotspot, the global hotspot for the virus, but we don't know what's going to happen in the coming weeks. Things appear to be flattening out a little bit in the UK, perhaps even peaking. But again, as we start to, relax restrictions on people's movements, things could change again quite rapidly. As we saw, they changed extremely rapidly through the course of March and April. So my recommendation would be, as you put together your lists, as you try to make sure they're balanced between reaches and targets and safeties, that you add to your consideration of what possibly might make a reach or what possibly might make a school very difficult for you to attend, its geographic location. I personally, in these times, would not be applying to universities in just one country. Because if you find yourself struggling to get a visa later on, if you find yourself unable, for whatever other reason to get to that country safely, or it just becomes too difficult for you and your family and movement, all those kinds of things, that would be, a real pity. So sure, maybe the US is your top choice destination, but maybe you should consider a few schools in your home country, the UK, Australia, Hong Kong, just to really mix it up and make sure that no matter what happens, you're going to find yourself with some good options. So, again, it's kind of take a step back, think about ways to be creative while taking care of yourself, while taking care of others around you. That's a very real need and a very real concern, but also just be smart, in how you do this. Communicate with your universities, let them know what's going on. They want you there ultimately, and so they'll do their best to make it possible, but just keep in mind that there are some risks associated with that. So, these are things, most of what I'm saying is probably really applying to juniors who are applying this fall. We know that there are some specific concerns that obviously seniors have who have just been admitted and, the younger students. But, we want to kind of keep the discussion focused in the immediate future, just because of how unpredictable all this is, and we don't know what things are going to look like a year from now. Hopefully much more normal. But Christine is going to, have a little bit of discussion now in terms of how this will have an impact on how applications are going to be read coming up in the fall.
Thanks, Scott. Again, very informative to just hear your thoughts on the various factors and how they're impacted. So to speak more specifically about applications for this coming fall, I think a lot of perhaps 11th grade students who are, home considering like, how is this all going to come together for me as I consider my university options this fall. I think that really the key word is contextualization. It's always been important. It will continue to be important. But something also to understand, as Scott has pointed out too, this is just a very human process. We are hit with a natural disaster globally, and we all are in this situation. Admissions officers at times seem like this kind of black box behind this online form that you're filling out and submitting, and then a few months later you get a decision, are actually real human making decisions. Scott and I were both admissions officers. We read applications, we met with students, we sat in committees, we had very tough discussions about very, very good students who would bring very great things and talents and contributions to our campuses and our communities. And so those conversations will continue. And they also understand how students are impacted during this time. I was just reading an admissions blog by admissions officer from Georgia Tech University in the state of Georgia. And she said, I see students in their homes having to balance studying and other things. Scott mentioned mental health, just staying well. I see students having to do schoolwork at the same dinner table as their parents are working at the same time. Some students may not even have access to internet and various computing devices. We all are in this, and they see students, and that will continue to be a very real part of the process, even more so this year. So that's one thing I think we want to get across to students and families, is that be assured that real people are making decisions. It's not a machine. They don't input factors and hard numbers and get a decision at the end of the process, but they do read your applications. We all read applications. It's being read and it's being discussed, and they do see students and they do understand everyone's particular situation. And so back to that context is important. As one high school may be impacted more so than another. Scores are impacted because a student in a particular area cannot register for certain exams, even if they're not canceled because everyone else is registered. So that contextualization will continue to be very important about grades, about test scores, about activities and demonstrated interest and more. And Scott talked about the test optional and what that could mean at various universities. Again, that's still a very developing front of the process. So we will learn more as the weeks and the month come to find out what does that exactly mean for all the universities out there in the process. And so that holistic process becomes even more holistic, even more contextualized, as we've been and talking about that every factor will weigh into the process a little bit more. So if there isn't a test score, a sort of set a test score for a student, admission officers will really have to dive into that particular application and reading from their essays and trying to understand the student and what has been going on in the students' lives, as well as perhaps recommendations. Students, really, just learning more about a student from the teacher's perspective. So that could become an even more important part of the process. Recommendations from teachers, recommendation from the counselor, and perhaps other important individuals, like a supervisor who know the student very well, that could speak to the student's various personal qualities. That could be more important as well in the process. Demonstrated interest, for example, as Scott mentioned, is important to various universities. And so again, while students cannot visit campuses, they won't perhaps look into a supplemental essay that universities often require students to write in addition to their main essay that comes with whichever platform, like the Common App that they're using for their application, that will help them to understand, has a student thoroughly researched the school, even virtually, with all the different means of researching, as Scott mentioned, virtual tours. You can contact professors to learn more about their work. Has a student certainly thoroughly done that and reflected in genuine interest in a particular school? So they will rely on all these particular different aspects in the interview process as well, if not in person, certainly virtually, to really get a sense of the student and who that person may be. So holistic becomes even more holistic, contextualized become even more contextualized as students prepared, as admissions offices prepare for this coming fall in the application season. So I'll again turn back to Scott to just kind of wrap all of this up and talk more specifically about how can we really, for students at this point, just some of the highlights of what they can do to really engage and prepare, be as successful as they can as we head into this fall season.
Yeah, so I mean, I think at this point we can kind of put it into some bullets, right? To sort of summarize what we've been talking about. And I think that it's be proactive. I think that that's really the name of the game here, because things are dynamic, they are changing rapidly, and you can't just sort of sit back and say, oh, I didn't know, because right now you've got some time, many of you. So you can stay engaged. If you're a student affected by school closures due to COVID-19, it's important that you continue to stay engaged with your studies, as hard as that is. Again, I think everybody's going to understand that it really can be difficult to concentrate at home. I mean, those of us, I'm working from home and it's hard. There are a lot of distractions around you, but as best as you can, stay engaged. Continue with your test prep is the second bullet. So, right now, especially if you're a junior, you've got some time to prepare for exams like the SAT and the ACT. International students in particular often struggle with this exam because in many ways it's a very English, very American exam, but that's not an excuse. You really do need to take the time, familiarize yourself with it. There are loads of free tests online. And if you need tutoring, that can still be available to you virtually, via, again, Skype and Zoom and media like that, because we don't know what every university is going to do in terms of its testing policy. Many will be test optional, many will not. In fact, we suspect that the College Board may start offering extra test days, which means that even though March and April, possibly May and June won't be available to you, it is certainly possible that they might offer exams July, August, September, October, in which case, excuses sort of start to vanish because you could have been using this time preparing for those exams. So we don't want to assume what the world will look like in 3-4 months' time. Be prepared is basically the mantra. Do virtual information sessions and visits when and where possible. Again, lots of universities are going to offer those, so take the time to do your research. We're going analog in some ways, even though a lot of this is on the internet. I mean, it's not like I graduated a million years ago, but most of us didn't have the opportunity to do college visits back then. That's become more of a trend than a fad, but it's not something that's necessary for you to make a decision. It's a nice to have. So what you can do online, you still should be doing online. Researching, getting to know your universities, and getting to understand why it's a good fit for you. That's really just good for you anyway, so that ultimately when you apply and are admitted somewhere, you know it's going to be the place that's really good for you and in terms of accomplishing your goals, and where you're just going to thrive and grow as a person. So while you're doing that research, the end goal of that is refining your school list. You'll hear us use the term that we want a list to be balanced, ultimately, meaning reaches, schools that are very difficult for you to get into, where maybe you don't have the same numbers as the typical admitted student. Targets where you do look like the typical admitted student in terms of your grades and your test scores and the hard factors. And then what we would call safety or likely schools, those being schools where your hard factors are significantly better than the typical admitted student. You still want to be constructing that type of a list in these times. And so use this time to do your research and refine a school. Refine your list rather. And then it's get creative. You know, as Christine said, we've all been getting creative about how to live our lives in these crazy times. Netflix parties and watching virtual concerts and all that. Do the same thing with your schoolwork, with your extracurricular activities. At the end of the day, universities aren't just looking for students who tick boxes in terms of the activities they do. It's almost never impressive just that you're doing the activity itself. You know, lab research, being a published author, these are things that the top schools see over and over and over. But it's why you're doing it. It's that there's genuine enjoyment, that there's genuine intellectual curiosity. And so, you know, I would theorize as an admissions officer that if you're someone who genuinely enjoys this club that you've been doing all of this time, that it's not going to be something you don't want to do to meet with your peers and get something set up to have a Zoom conference. If you genuinely enjoy serving others, it's not going to be a major, you know, difficulty for you to think about how to do that in your community or how to raise awareness or how to raise funds. So be creative in terms of making some of these things happen. Reach out to an internship that you had that you think might be canceled and see if it can happen virtually. They might just be really glad to have the help. And for you, that contact with the outside world is going to be really, really great. And then, of course, prep for your college application. Now, some of you may not be ready, you know, to start preparation. Now you're thinking, my goodness, I thought that started in September. But at IvyWise, I can tell you that many of the students I'm working with right now, we are already starting the Common Application and their essays. So there's no time like the present. You know, if you're not ready, that's okay. You know, maybe right now it's just registering on the Common App website, looking through, familiarizing yourself with it, and starting to basically outline your essays. That's okay. Brainstorm some topics, just get going. Again, maybe try not to write about, you know, the virus, unless you really have a story to tell. You know, these essays ultimately are meant to be about you. I think that's the number one tip that you're going to get on your college essays, that they're not about things. And so, you know, maybe your family's really going through something related to this virus. Maybe you have a parent who's on the front lines helping us fight it. Or somebody you know is infected or ill, or something is happening in your community that's really having an impact on you, then yes, you can write about it. But just writing about the virus in general, again, it's going to be very common and probably not going to set you apart in the admissions pool. So think about these things. You've got a little bit of time, but you can use some of the time you have now to get ahead in the process and make it a lot less stressful for you. So that's sort of the roundup and I think the summary. And then I'm just going to pass it back to Felix to take us forward and maybe even have some time for questions and answers.
Great. Thanks, Scott. And thanks, Christine, for all of this information. So let's move forward now to the Q&A section. So in addition to the live questions that viewers are currently submitting now, we had a few people also submit their questions beforehand on Instagram and our blog. So we will be addressing those too. So Christine, can you take the lead?
Great. Thank you, Felix, for that. And so we're just going to cover a few questions that we've been, kind of categories of questions that we've been getting beforehand on Instagram, on our Facebook. So one really relates to, I think one category really relates to test scores. So there was a question about whether or not test scores would impact merit aid, financial aid. So in addition to, and I've seen some other questions even today, how will it impact financial aid? Admissions office, universities, admission offices have different financial aid policies. If a school is need blind, that means they do not consider need a student in the admissions process. Some universities are need aware, and so they do ask for financial information of various family, and this especially is important to and for internationals. I don't think that it, as general kind of an aid question, will change drastically policy. But again, as the situation unfolds into the fall, universities are thinking about whether or not they will be online or in person this fall, and how their financial status may be impacted by all of this. Do pay attention to any updates on the financial aid policies of various universities, of the list that Scott was talking about, as you refine the list and to really take a close look. I don't think, again, things are not going to shift drastically. So for merit aid or scholarships, so based on the merit of the student, not just the need of the student, but merit of the student, their academic performance, their transcript, their test scores, whatever was required, I think will move forward in the same way that the application process rubric will move forward in a very similar way. If students don't have test scores, I think whatever committee that's reviewing financial aid or merit aid or scholarship will use whatever criteria they have. If a university has made the testing optional, again, they will have to review without test scores if that's not submitted because the student cannot take it. Again, the context will be important, and it is more so than ever understandable in this year that students may not have all the components that they need or that used to be required for considering of merit aid or scholarship aid. For students who are doing well, again, I think Scott mentioned that test scores can play a role, even though we're seeing test optional policies. If I've already taken my SATs or ACT or I had a subject test earlier, will that mean less? No, I think that will continue to be, again, a factor. If you have scores, scores are always helpful for admission officers to get a better sense of the student. It is standardized in the sense that globally, whether you are in Hong Kong, Singapore, Omaha, Hawaii, Dubai, they're all taking the same test. So it's a standard kind of universal measure of students across the board. So whatever scores are still available, that will continue to be helpful in the admissions process. We had a couple of other questions regarding just whether or not, as the dates are getting canceled, will they be making more days available? Scott mentioned that, yes, what we're monitoring from the College Board is that they are very seriously considering additional test dates in summer and fall, testing sites perhaps even. And the president or the CEO of the College Board, David Coleman, has mentioned that if things are very dire into the fall, that schools are continued to be closed, that at-home testing is being considered by the College Board as a potential eventuality. So again, this is, as far as we know, we're trying to stay on top of all the development, and we don't know for sure until the College Board makes these decisions. It was very thoughtful in thinking through about the APs, but information even with the AP exams were coming out it kind of in waves. They decided, yeah, we'll go on, and it was 45 minutes, and then later on they develop the schedule. So I think that we can expect a similar rhythm from these organizations. They're weighing June test days right now, and they'll continue to make decisions as we know more about what will happen in the summer and in the fall timeframe due to the coronavirus pandemic. I will turn over to Scott. There were other couple of questions regarding extracurricular activities. Scott did a wonderful job covering it, but maybe you can just help us to just summarize, what do you think are couple of really good extracurricular ideas that students can engage during this time, perhaps during the remainder of the semester that we have and into the summer and even fall, that you think would really help them stand out. For students, for instance, may miss a specific type of internship this summer, like working at a bank, or they may have secured another internship in a laboratory. What do you think would be a good way to kind of continue on with their passions, even though they might not be in a lab or in a office building to continue on with their internship or summer opportunities?
Yeah. So I mean, I think again, it's about the mindset, of what you're looking for around yourself and what's available. And so the answer to this question is going to depend a little bit on what's available around you. But some of it, I think, if you, for example, had already secured an internship, I really do think that reaching out to the company with whom you are interning is your first port of call. Because if they're working from home, they will be, more than happy to have you continuing to work with them. But something you have to think about is think of it from the, the point of view of the company. Right now, they're just so busy trying to stay afloat and trying to keep things moving. They're probably not really thinking about their interns, right? But if you, the intern, can write in and say, hey, look, I still want to engage with you. Can I at least sit in on some of the meetings and some of the video calls that you're going to have? Here's a project that I was really interested in being a part of. Is that project continuing? Can I be a part of the virtual conversation? I was working with a student who had an architecture internship coming up. That company still has the contract. They're still planning on putting the building up. And so, she can still exchange plans with the architect whom she was going to shadow. They can still have the conversations via email. They can still meet on video chats like this, but recognize that that architect's focus right now is not on you, the student. So be proactive in reaching out to them and making the suggestion that you'd still like to be a part of it. Now, failing that, online courses are still going to be available. And so this is your opportunity to explore this area of your interest through an academic offering. I might recommend, more than usual, perhaps taking it for credit, just to demonstrate to the universities that you're still interested in the rigor and not just kind of passing the time a little bit. And so that's one way to increase your knowledge and then just demonstrate, that you're serious about this in a way that's more than just, casual. Besides that, I think it's constantly thinking about, is there any way that I can involve people? Is that even feasible via some sort of online medium? It is going to be difficult, with a lot of the activities that some of us do. If you're a performer and the show cannot go on, then unfortunately, that might be it. But hey, people are doing all kinds of stuff with Zoom and TikTok and other, forms to create shows and create entertainment. And so even if you are a performer, that's something that could be useful. Given the impact on elderly people, people of a certain age of this virus, and the fact that, quite frankly, a lot of them are just really cut off from human contact. Play a virtual concert for an old age home, where the folks are just sitting around and don't have anybody to come visit them. It's a great use of your time, and you can really brighten up somebody's day. So I think that this sort of dovetails with another question that I see here on, how to take care of your own mental health during this difficult time. I think that unfortunately, after all this, a lot of psychologists are going to discover just why isolation is considered a form of torture and just how lonely all of this can be, for a lot of people. But one of the things that's often a great cure for that kind of loneliness and just a great cure for when you yourself are struggling, think about other people and how you can help them. Honestly, reach out to your friends and just ask how they're doing. That can make a huge difference to somebody who's just kind of hanging out by themselves and staring at the four walls all the time, or in a situation with their parents or their families that are difficult and presenting a lot of challenges. So, these service ideas, I keep mentioning them partially just because, hey, we want to make the world a better place, as cliche as that sounds, but right now it's a pretty crappy place and there's a lot that we can do to do that, but also just because that's going to be good for you, So I would think about my activities in that light.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. I see that our participants are submitting really great questions, so we want to turn to some of the live questions and address those. So as far as do international students fall under the test optional policy? Yes. So if you're reading kind of the language, they're making it test optional for all applicants. I will caution international students that some of the English language proficiency requirements still stands. A school may be test optional for the SAT or ACT requirement, but they are still requiring TOEFL or the EATSL or another form of English language proficiency. So again, that's something that's as you're doing the research now, pulling together the list, to be very mindful that test optional does not mean that no tests may be required for international students. So do check that as part of the process, or just staying, on top of the news following our web blog. This is continuing to develop as universities are making these decisions and policies. We have some other questions. Lillian, for instance, asked about deadlines. Are college considering moving early decision deadlines? There was another question earlier too. whether or not students, colleges will consider pushing the dates for other the deadlines for other their applications. I think that's really to be determined. I think, I mean, from kind of very early chatter of some of the forums that we've been part of as admission counselors and admission officers, that universities are weighing options. I know that right now a lot of universities, I have friends who are professors teaching right now, and they're really kind of thinking through, what does it mean in the fall? Are we going to go online? Do we push the start date of our university? I think Boston University just announced that they will push it to the start date to January. So I think there's just a lot of consideration on university's part, and that will be part of the consideration for admission offices. Right now, no one has made any decision about application deadlines, whether or not those will be pushed back. Will they keep early decision, early action? Will they, if they do keep it, would it be in December rather than November? I think everybody's thinking about these questions, just like all the parents and students out there, but we don't know until we know from universities. But certainly, I think now that we are entering into April, and that's kind of the light. I'm not sure if people are really seeing it, and so July and June, July are impacted, I think, and now we're thinking about, well, what's going to happen in the fall. So that's again to be determined. The question, another one, a student says, Joy asked about, and just kind of, how well students look at IB grades. I know a lot of international students or are part of programs where there's an IB curriculum. IB curriculum and how that functions in the admissions process is that grades do matter, so they will look at your transcript when you submit that. But in the fall admissions process, it's really the predicted grades that are also shared from the high school to with the universities. And so that will continue, I think, to be part of the process, even though this year's IB May exams were impacted. I don't think that will impact the predicted grades. But again, if a school is closed and online learning is in a various format, that is very much up to the high school to decide how those grades will be predicted, those scores will be predicted. And I think it will be up to, again, the admissions office and admissions readers looking into the context of a particular high school in Hong Kong or in Singapore or in Dubai or in Washington, D.C., and how all these high schools are being impacted and what will happen with that. So another set of questions I'm looking at has to do with, let's see, maybe Scott, you can take some of these. Aparna mentioned that if my junior school gives a choice to take pass and fail versus grade option, how does one decide which one to take? And relatedly, if you can also, Aparna had another question too, is that if students, admitted students for this year are starting to ask for deferral years, how would you think that might impact students class of 2021, the current 11th graders, impacting their admission options when they're applying this year?
Yeah, so I'll take that first question in terms of pass-fail versus a grade option. I think that you really want to assess this based on where you are individually as a student. If it's a struggle right now for you to learn from home and you think that your grades are going to take a dip as a result, I take the pass-fail option. So many high schools are going to this option, but universities are going to be very flexible on it. If they're getting transcripts from everyone else at your school who's doing pass-fail, fine. There's no shame, I don't think, in going ahead and taking that option. Because what does end up hurting you on a transcript is always low grades. And so, if you're struggling to concentrate, you're struggling with access to the internet, that kind of thing, and you feel like my grades are actually really going to go down this term, go pass-fail. If you're doing well and you're keeping up and you are just killing it, then maybe take the grade option. But, universities are being flexible, and if there's ever a time, when universities aren't going to be sticklers for all of the rules, I think this is it. As far as a gap year, a couple of thoughts. I mean, yes, I think it's possible that some international students this year may not be able to get to, the universities they've been admitted to and might end up being sort of forced into deferral, which could end up changing, the numbers for next year. We don't know. That's just one of those things that we can't be sure about. but it could have an impact, and it's something to keep in touch with the university about. If your student is possibly thinking proactively, hey, maybe I should plan a gap year to make sure that by the time I'm ready to attend, all of this has just passed by. I think the main thing to think about with gap years always is, how is this kind of propelling me forward towards my university career? If you're thinking about a particular major but not certain about it, use your gap year to get more certain. Maybe an internship, maybe a couple of online courses or a job in that particular field that will help you understand, do I actually want to major in this? My experience has been that, students who take a gap year generally enter university just more mature and more prepared for everything they're about to experience. And that to me is the great benefit ultimately of a gap year. So even if you're thinking about this now as just sort of a matter of strategy, I would still say your ultimate aim is still to use it as something that enhances your eventual college experience. And the way to do that is think about what you're eventually planning to study or what you're thinking of for your career, and see if you can gain some meaningful experience that will help you by the time you get started.
Great. Thank you, Scott, for that. I think we'll just take two more final questions. Ariana asked, would you recommend international students contact admission counselor for their area to contact them to show interest for selective school? I think that would be a great idea. Any communication with the university staff member, whether it's a professor or even students, and certainly admission officers, should be very thoughtful. You should thoroughly research, the student should thoroughly research the university beforehand and have very good connection points to make with them. I'm interested in economics. I'm interested in history. I research your history department. I love Professor so-and-so who teaches this particular class and is doing research in this lab. And to demonstrate interest to admissions officer, to have that kind of very thorough, detailed conversation about over email. You can do that. About why a university is interesting to you and why it's a good fit. I think that's definitely a good idea. But again, thoughtful communication, because emails sometimes don't come across very well, and it could have the opposite effect if the student asks a very a surface question that could be easily answered by just looking at the website. What's the student-faculty ratio? That's something that you should be, part of the research, not be asked an admissions officer. To find out who the international admissions officer is for your particular region, many admission offices do list the staff directory on that website. I consider that an opportunity for them. They're saying that we do welcome communication because we have listed our staff directory, including their email address. So feel free to contact us. We'd love to hear from you. Thoughtful communication, of course. If you cannot find an admission staff directory, and that does happen, and many universities, Harvard does not do that, Yale does not do that, Princeton does not do that. That's understandable in the sense that they get literally tens of thousands of applicants each year, and they don't want their admissions officers' inboxes to be flooded. So if you want to communicate your interest, there are other ways. I think Scott mentioned, social media. You can follow blogs. There are other really thoughtful ways that you can engage with the admissions director. And again, once again, I think, as we learn more about what's going to happen in the fall, admission officers often travel to various parts of the world to do presentations. If travel is limited this fall, again, I don't know for sure, but I am wondering if admission offices would consider doing virtual presentations with a particular high school. Maybe you will have a Zoom or WebEx meeting with a particular school in Hong Kong or a particular school in Singapore in lieu of an actual school visit or a regional presentation. So again, I think be on the lookout for opportunity to connect, even if you can't locate who is the admissions director responsible for your particular area. And again, that's not in every university. MIT, for instance, the University of Virginia, they don't have regional directors per se. So don't feel like you're missing out if you're not able to contact an admissions officer at a particular university. There are many other thoughtful ways to demonstrate your interest in your essays we've mentioned, in the interviews that you might be doing later on. So many different ways to do that. And just one more final question here. We have, oh goodness, I was just on that. There is a question from Asfar asking about whether or not applying to a less impacted major in a university increases chance of acceptance. I think that's a very good question. in any context, even without the coronavirus situation. For the US process, I understand that a lot of international students may be considering both UK and US. In the UK process, what you apply to your course, your major, it matters a lot more. And the US process, you do have to indicate for many application, most application, an intended or perspective or an area of interest, but students are not admitted into a particular major. So in that sense, it doesn't really affect your application all too much because there isn't a quota to admit how many economics students, for instance, at Yale University. They're just looking at students really more for their academic interest. As Scott's been talking about, a lot of just your depth and how can you demonstrate your, whether in classroom or outside of the classroom, your various interests. They're looking to see, oh, you're interested in economics. That's great. We understand that you may come to our university, explore that in other majors. That's great. But how have you pursued that current interest that you've indicated, economics, at depth? Have you taken online courses? Are you doing economics research? Is it applied economics? Is it behavior economics? Is it theoretical? So that's what they're more interested when they ask students, at least on the US admission side, for an intended major or area of study. So I don't think that really is impacted significantly by the coronavirus situation. I don't think all of a sudden they're going to see a dearth of, computer science applicants or economics applicants because students have been pursuing their interest all along. So that shouldn't be too impacted. And perhaps just one final question. I know there was a student who asked about the subject test. So the subject test, that's a really great question. That's been changing very rapidly in the US. No university in the United States right now requires subject tests. That wasn't the case just a couple months ago, where some universities were still requiring that. So you do not need that. And of course, in the test optional situation, the subject tests are optional and may be recommended at some university. For example, Georgetown in the US strongly recommend 3 subject tests or AP exam. If you're missing out on a particular date, let's say the June one, I know that SART data was asking that June, that's when the world history exams are usually given, and it's only given twice a year, and the other one is in December. So what if I miss a June test date? How can I demonstrate a particular interest in that? If that particular exam is not offered anymore, one, to know that, again, subject tests are not required anymore, so you're not missing out a score. There are other ways to demonstrate your interest in world history other than a test score. Again, you can talk about it perhaps in an essay that asks about your academic interest. If you're really strong in the subject, perhaps a teacher who taught you in history class can also speak to your strength and interest in that particular subject. So there are other things that a student can do if they were planning on taking a particular test to demonstrate a strength or an interest that they can't do anymore because of the cancellation of test dates. So again, we just want to encourage students to know that the rubric is not has not changed, won't be changed too much in the fall, but to really consider your own context, do the best you can, consider how you can balance it well, being at home, perhaps with your family, and so do the best you can. And admission officers are human, like all of us, and so they will understand your context and situation. So that's the end of the question. Hopefully we've addressed all, and definitely go to our website if you feel like some question may not be answered specifically. Often we have posts that have already addressed that particular question, so definitely refer to all the resources that we mentioned throughout our presentation today. So thank you for your questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Christine, and thanks to everyone for joining us. You both have shared really, really useful information in these tough times. So as Christine just mentioned, do visit our website and our blog, because the situation is evolving, and we're continuing to update that. And again, the links of the resources that our counselors mentioned, they will be in the comments, so do check those out. We also have the free resource on our website with more information for preparing for the college admissions process in this coming fall. And then this is the link now at the bottom of the screen. Okay, thanks everyone again for watching, and everyone take care during these tough times. Thank you. Goodbye.